Many years ago, I had a friend who was in a dying marriage. Things were not going well. They were separated. They were headed toward divorce. This friend was standing for his marriage, but one thing he kept saying over and over and over about his spouse was that she was just a sick person. And when he said it, he sounded compassionate, almost like he felt sorry for her. And when he said she was a sick person, he was referring to the fact that she had depression. She had anxiety. She had like a form of celiac. She had many other things. And so she really struggled in life at the time with just kind of getting her act together. She was a good person, but he kept saying she's a sick person. And I kept trying to tell him that as long as he referred to her in his own headspace, in his own heart, as a sick person, nothing was really going to change for the better, because he's fundamentally failing to accept her truly for who she is. And he's always going to see himself as the responsible one, or the one who has his act together, or the one who, this person would be lost without me. A bit of a savior complex, which he admitted to. And so I guess that brings us here in our episode about acceptance. How do we go about fundamentally making sure that we don't view our spouses in a light that inadvertently causes us to not accept them? How do we change our perception of our spouse in a way that causes us to have that positive acceptance of them, not a fake acceptance?
Yeah. I think it's the opposite side of the coin of contempt. So one of the things we talk about a lot at Marriage Helper is that if I believe that I am better than you, if I'm superior to you, that's contempt. And I will then treat you in that way. Like, oh, Rob's just stupid. He can't make decisions for himself. Rob's just sick. He can't think clearly for himself, or whatever it might be. That's just the opposite way. Like what will happen if I think that way of you is I therefore think I am more high. I think of myself more highly than you. So I am always right. You're the one who's broken and wrong. And that is the opposite of acceptance. Whereas acceptance is I can love and meet you and accept you where you are, no matter what you have done or what the situation is. And I don't view myself as better than you. It's kind of a way of like coming down to be on your level, although we shouldn't even have to come down. We should just like start and stay at the same level as each other. So contempt ends relationships, especially marriages, because ultimately, and the research shows it, you don't want to be around someone who's constantly treating you like you're less than, and your health begins to fail. People whose spouse treat them with contempt are so much more likely to have immune system disorders, get sick all the time, all of those things. Whereas I don't know that there's been research or data on this, but when you're in a relationship where the other person treats you with love and acceptance, I can only imagine you're going to have a healthier, more vibrant life.
Yep.
When that's the case. So in terms of like going back to your friend, what should he have done? What does acceptance actually look like?
Well, you bring up a really good point that what he was practicing was a form of contempt. What should he have done? Well, there's a million different things he could have or should have done differently, I suppose. I want to go back real quick, though. There was a text message thread that as things were falling apart, he shared this with me with his partner. And when we go back to him viewing her as a fundamentally sick person, so he has contempt, I imagine an unspoken thought that one would be forced to kind of have is, well, how can my spouse, who's just a sick person, how can they really have a valid logical argument or say anything that's really valid, logical, etc., especially when you view them as a very illogical person. Oftentimes in marriages, men view their wives as very illogical because women do tend to display more emotion. We sometimes wrongly assume that thus they must not have any logic, which isn't true. Everyone, when flooded, everyone, when overwhelmed with emotion, is going to display lots of emotion and very little logic in the moment. That doesn't mean they're illogical people. And so in this text message thread, his wife, soon to be ex-wife, he had said to her, I think you should go to X location in the world. You would love it.
He said to her,
He
like,
said
you should
that
go
to
on
her.
a trip.
Yes, to, I forget what place it was.
Okay.
She had as a barista at Starbucks, and by the way, she's a very well-traveled person. She's traveled more places than the average bear. And one day she was a barista at Starbucks, and a customer was like, "Oh yeah, Rome, you would love it if you ever got to go." Assuming that she had never been. And she's like, I've been to Rome, probably multiple times. And she was just so tired of people. It was kind of like this low-key condescension.
Mm-hmm.
You would love it if you ever got. And it's like, well, you know what? Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. You don't know if I would or not. Why don't I be the judge of that? And so she pushed back on that, not on the suggestion to go to that place, but rather the tone being taken. And it's an easy mistake to make. It's not, I think most reasonable people would agree that if I say in a text message to you, Kimberly, let's go to Australia, I think you'd love it. Well, you've already been. So unless I checked, you did love it. So you probably wouldn't take offense to that. But if people are constantly saying to you, oh, you would love it if you did this, that, and you're like, why don't I be the judge of that? At some point, you're probably going to start pushing
Well, and the
back.
state of our marriage currently is in such that
Yeah.
I think that also the state of the relationship that someone would say that in
matters too.
matters.
The position he took was, she's crazy. This is her having an episode of craziness. He sent lots of screenshots to me, and he wanted me to validate that she's crazy, and I didn't do that. I think that was disappointing. That all comes from a position of contempt.
Mm-hmm.
How can my spouse who is beneath me, they're sick or they're just not capable, they're incompetent, they're
stupid,
lazy, you name it. How can they say anything worth my attention, worth my time? How can they make a logical point? Many men will take the position of, how can my wife raise a logical point? I know of another couple, and I believe they stopped doing this. I say they, him. This individual, he has like a doctorate degree, PhD. And his wife, I believe she didn't even have an undergraduate degree. Those marriages can work fine as long as the person with the PhD doesn't start thinking of themselves more highly than they ought. Mm-hmm. And I recall him making statements about her that she's just stupid and things of that nature. He would often do like a mocking voice of her when she would want something. And he's like, no, that's stupid. I believe they stopped doing that. Hence, they are still married. They're not divorced. And that's good. But I feel that contempt is perhaps one of the greatest enemies to acceptance, I suppose, in a nutshell. So I can't tell you all the things he should have done besides accept her where she was at. I think he would argue he was doing that. He's like, oh, well, she's sick, but I accept her for her sickness. And it's like, maybe get out of that headspace. And if you do have a spouse who really is, let's just say they're suffering from mental illness to the degree they have to sometimes be institutionalized. Hopefully they're not harming anyone or themselves, but let's just say they check themselves in every now and again to the psych ward because they're really struggling. I still don't think looking at them as a sick person is going to do you any favors. Looking at them as a flawed person just as we all are, who happens to have a medical condition, and you're going to stand by them through it. I think that's probably a better approach. And by the way, in this marriage, she was nowhere near checking herself into a psych ward. She wasn't harming herself or other people. And after their divorce, which it sucked, it wasn't great. They did make some attempts to reconcile, but ultimately divorce. They both went their own way, and they both actually flourished quite a bit. She became a nurse. She, it sounds bad to say that she got her life together, but she did get a lot of things together that were previously, and it was tough for her. And he also went on to have a stellar career. And they both now have children from other folks. So perhaps there was mutual contempt there in that relationship. As you said earlier, it makes people sick. It can cause people to have all kinds of adverse reactions that can translate over into their habits or lack of habits in life that affects them. Constantly being around another person who has contempt for them. And from the stories I heard from them, there was a lot of mutual contempt.
Yeah.
Which really stinks.
But it could have worked. It could have. It was close to getting saved at one point. But for it to, meant both of them had to change the way that they saw and viewed each other. And acceptance, I think it's worth explaining and defining what acceptance means and what it looks like. So acceptance, as we know, is the key to love. Because if I ultimately don't feel accepted by you in our marriage, then I will never feel like I can truly open up and be intimate or be vulnerable, be open, be transparent, because you're never going to accept me for how I truly am. And therefore, it will keep a wall built between us. And that was a big issue the first 2 years of our marriage, probably more specifically. And I mean, I can remember when on both of our sides, like lack of acceptance in different ways for each of us. So I remember when we first got married and I wanted to be super controlling of what you ate. Do you remember that?
Because I was at it. It was
a lot of McDonald's.
Yeah. And that made me want to dig my heels in.
You did. Yeah, you totally did.
And I got fat. Yeah. And if you look at the love path, so the listeners, if they have access to the love path, or you could get on Google and type in Joe Beam's love path and look at that image and notice how acceptance is a bridge. After you get past attraction and you get past all those things, you find yourself at the bridge of acceptance. And it's a bridge. Even those with the intent to cross it may not fully do so or may fall off and have to proverbially swim back to shore and try again. We did. Our first 2 years, we had the workshop on the front end of our marriage. And yet we, for the first couple of years, still failed to accept one another fully. Full acceptance. And here's the thing. If your spouse isn't accepting you, you can't control that. You can control if you accept them. I believe you probably started just predictive nature of our personality. You probably started fully accepting me first. And at some point, I believe I started following suit. And if you look, and again, if you're pulling up the image of Joe Beam's love path, I'd Google it or whatever in the middle of the podcast, maybe press pause, take a look at that. You look further down the love path and you will see the joint aspirations. But notice it's on the other side of the bridge of acceptance. You can try on paper to have joint aspirations with one another, but if you don't fully accept one another, those things are going to start falling apart. You'll see it, there are these HGTV fixer-upper type shows. where celebrity couples, each person was a celebrity in their own right, they get married and they'll do the Fixer Upper show together. And a couple of years later, they're divorced. Well, on paper, they had the attraction, they probably had some limerence going on, they had their joint aspirations. I'd be willing to bet that if you were to like go and map out where things were breaking, I think a lack of full mutual acceptance is probably kind of toward the root of things, which leads to the practicing of horsemen. I would almost venture, this is a hypothesis, so Dr. Gottman, you're probably not listening, but if you are, don't come hunt me down. I would venture to say that lack of acceptance is the root cause of the practicing of horsemen. In other words, when you practice horsemen, it probably comes out of the heart of a lack of acceptance toward the other person. Because if I don't truly want to accept you for who you are, something wrong with her, I'll start to have contempt for that thing, whatever it is. I may decide that, like, how dare she say something to me when she, say something about my McDonald's when she this, that, or the other. So then I decide to return fire with criticism. And then when that criticism is not received well, I start getting defensive. Mm-hmm. And then I just stomp off and stonewall until the next fight. I would say at the heart of that, at the root of that, the root cause, if the four horsemen, if it was a tree with four big branches of death, the roots would be lack of acceptance. That's my hypothesis. I would say that's how important it is. And if you're looking at that love path image, you're not going to be able to really get to those aspirations that you share with one another and start working on in life without the full acceptance. You just can't go there. You can try, and it's going to fall apart every time. You got to go back to the bridge of acceptance, and you got to cross that fully.
Yeah. So how did we do this in our marriage?
Slowly. Didn't happen overnight.
No. But let's paint the picture because I think that it's a lot of information to hear, but hearing it through story can help understand how it all works and how it all plays together. So the first several years of our marriage, probably more than just the first two. I mean, the first two we were together and it was difficult. So I was an extrovert, you were an introvert. That's one thing that we didn't really accept or learn to love about each other for a while. And it drove a deeper wedge. So when we lived in Korea, so we got married, moved to Korea, for those who don't know. And you were in a pretty high demand job, working 10 to 12 hours a day, flying nights, several days a week. So you were new to really being in the Army and being in that kind of position where you were over a platoon. And things like that. So you were just under super high stress.
Yeah, and you'd work 13, 14 days in a row sometimes.
Well, I couldn't work at first.
No, I would.
Oh, yeah, you would work, yeah. Yes, so you were working a ton.
And you weren't working at all.
And I wasn't working at all.
So you're the extrovert at home alone for
no
12
car,
plus hours a day.
No way to leave.
No car. You had friends, but I mean, they were often stuck at home without a car too. And I, the introvert, stuck around people all day, 12 plus hours at a time. I come home, well, what do I want to do?
You want to chill out.
I don't want to talk. I don't want to think.
Nope.
I don't want to move. I just want to lay there. And you are like a chatterbox with some overcharged batteries in your back, just wanting to go 100 miles an hour and share your
and
life
do
story.
Things and leave.
Yeah, leave, go do stuff.
Yeah.
I would say that those, and that was hard. Those were hard times. And that was a rough way to start the marriage.
Yeah, because we would fight. So
we would fight about it. I do think, though, that we realized the differences, and we also were like, look, I felt that on some level I could accept you for being an extrovert. I didn't love, I couldn't help, like, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to control out of you that at the end of the day, when I get home, you're going to want to be a chatterbox and do all this. And I probably tried at first.
You did.
Okay.
You didn't try to control the extrovert out of me. You tried to control the rest of the scenario around my life.
Okay.
Like, no, you can't take the car. No, you can't travel into Seoul. No, you can't do all of this stuff. So you'd put all these rules in place around me where you might have been like, oh, you're an extrovert and that's great. And I love you even though you're an extrovert. But I couldn't actually go do anything.
Well, in the flaw in being married to a man who's watching Taken probably 3 or 4 times is that I, of course, imagined Taken.
That I would be taken.
Yeah, and I'd be too busy to go rescue you, plus lack of martial arts skills. So I had this thing playing in my mind of if she goes off adventuring, like that's it, she'll be taken and I'll just never see her again, kind of thing. The car, I clamped down. I was just so stressed out that I was being very rigid. Mm-hmm. I could have loaned the car to you, and I did eventually.
14 years later, you tell me.
Thankfully, we got you another one at some point, but then you went back to the United States just a few months later. It stunk that as soon as we did get you a decent solution, and because we were kind of sick of each other, and you were like, you know what, I'm just going to go do grad school in the States.
Right.
And it was an excuse that we both used to we didn't want to separate on paper because that looks bad. But we also were just like, oh,
tired.
Marriage is hard.
Marriage was hard.
Yeah, and it wasn't until late in the Army game, and I think I made a lot more strides after the Army toward full acceptance. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I say, you need to do full acceptance. Just to be clear, I don't believe that's an overnight process. I don't believe that's a snap decision that you make right now. I choose to fully accept my spouse and then boom, magically you've fully accepted them. I think you can make a lot of progress toward fully accepting your spouse by deciding right now that that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But it will take time, and you have to check yourself, and you have to monitor yourself, hold yourself accountable on some level.
Yeah.
So, yeah, acceptance is not an instant thing. You can make an instant decision that is what you would like to do, but don't be fooled into thinking that suddenly means that you've done it. It took me years, and maybe there's still more for me to fully accept about you that I will discover as we go. Trusting, and I think it helps that I trust you to fully accept me as I venture to fully accept you. Mm-hmm. And if there are things about you that I don't fully accept yet, I look forward to discovering what those are and then changing my attitude toward whatever it is.
So a big shift that happened for us was, so you had been really controlling when we lived in Korea. And so what I ended up naturally doing was making this list, mental list of if Rob would just change these things, then everything would be better. And it was like, if he would be less controlling, if he would do this, if he would do that, whatever, right? So because of how I felt, it led to this mental list of how I didn't accept you. I didn't accept the things you were doing, but in how it felt controlled and some of those other things. But it also led to me just fundamentally feeling like and treating you like I didn't accept you. So it ended up being this cycle, like a cyclical nature. And it wasn't until I began to change. This was when we were in Fort Rucker the second time.
Now Fort Novacell.
Which was the worst. When we were in Fort Rucker the second time, it was that's when things really got to their climax, probably in our marriage in the negative way, when it was all just really really bad. And that was around the time where I ended up realizing that. And when we moved to Fort Hood from there, it was like that time, which was
Fort
all.
Cavazos.
I don't
Changed all the names of them.
I don't know these new names.
It's fine.
And so it was during that like 4-month period ish that I began to realize I have to focus on me. I can't control Rob because it's not going to work. So what can I do to begin to change myself? And I began to work on my pies more, accept you. And that's where what you were talking about earlier, like you felt like I had probably accepted you first. Well, it came out of me accepting myself first, working on myself, and realizing maybe I shouldn't just always walk on eggshells around you. Maybe I should just take like, hey, you know what? This is something I want to go do, or something, or hey, you shouldn't speak to me that way, or whatever it is. I began to stand up for myself a bit more, which those who know me probably could never imagine me not standing up for myself very much. But I began to change, but in a loving way, and it began to change our marriage. Now, there were some other things, I believe, that were really important in that process. We started going to a great church together. You were in a job that was not as stressful as it had been when we were in Alabama. So all of those things led to an alleviation of the outside stressors in the marriage, but also because of that, it led to an alleviation of the inside stressors in the marriage. And I really feel like Fort Hood was kind of our turning point.
For the better.
For the better.
Can you can speak to this way better than I. Accepting the person, can we touch on accepting the person, not the behaviors? So if you could go into, alcoholism, serial affairs, things of that nature, and how you accept a person without the behaviors. And then after that, could we get into the role of and how important self-acceptance is? I feel that the more I accept myself, the easier it is to accept others.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I accept myself, I'm not nervous before I speak publicly. I don't really care that much if I make a fool out of myself accidentally. It's not something I strive for, but it's just, if it happens, it happens. And there's a self-acceptance that's there. And it makes it easy to be comfortable in my own skin. It makes it easy to look at other people and be like, that's a flawed human being, just like me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in Toy Story 4, the spoon character is like, you're trash, just like me. Yeah. So if we could talk about accepting the person, not the behaviors, and then the role of self-acceptance.
Yeah. So it was also at Fort Hood that I had been working on my pies, working on accepting you no matter what, even when things were hard. And then one day you came to me and admitted that you had been struggling with an addiction that you had lied to me about for several years up until that, even when I had point blank asked you. And I think this is a perfect example of it. For some reason, I handled this really well. Like the me a year before, if you had told me that a year before, which you wouldn't have told me that a year before because our marriage wasn't good enough, like you were hiding it for a reason, and I think the state of our marriage was one of those reasons. But if you had told me that a year before, it likely would have been, oh my gosh, what do you mean? How could you? Just a ton of responding with further character attack, criticism, contempt, all of those things. But because you told me when you did, I don't even know if you remember my initial response, but I simply said, I'm so glad you told me. And I fully believe that we can work through this. So there was a response from me of, I accept you. I don't accept what you're doing. It's going to have to stop. We're going to have to make a plan to change it, which we did. But it didn't further ignite shame within you, I don't think, because it was, hey, I see that took a lot for you, and I love you, regardless of what you just said. And it was a very trust building experience as opposed to a trust breaking. Whereas if I had taken what you said to me and inflicted shame and all of those things, how could you likely would have not shared that with me again in the future and just hidden it, and it probably would have continued to fester. So we don't have to accept, and so that was our situation. But with things like when your spouse is drinking too much, it doesn't mean you go and get them the beer every time they ask for it. You can, but also you can't necessarily rip the beer out of their hand. So it's this fine tension between, hey, I love you, I see you're hurting, but this behavior can't continue for your good, for our family's good. So let's talk about that. It doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations, but those hard conversations are much easier to have when the other person knows that there's love and acceptance, and when those conversations aren't encapsulated in shame.
And if the listeners are familiar with Dr. Joe's talking about push behaviors, sometimes those conversations can be healthy pushes.
Yeah, necessary pushes.
A necessary push. And it may actually further push your spouse away. They may even feel very unaccepted. What do you mean I can't drink? You don't accept me how I am? I'm an alcoholic. I've been an alcoholic my whole life. How can you not accept me?
Right.
And it's like, you as a person, you aren't alcoholic. Like your identity, your name is Rob or Kimberly. It's not alcoholic.
Yeah.
Your identity is Rob or Kimberly, not alcoholic.
Right.
Alcoholic is a behavior pattern that you exhibit. And it's possible for me to accept Rob or Kimberly or whomever without accepting the habit. One example was a man, I think your father gave this example, that his wife basically decided that she wanted to go to sex clubs and have lots of partners, and that he needed to accept that about her. His reaction, I think very appropriately, was nope. You can accept a person without the behavior. And you can draw a line too. Like, this behavior is so destructive.
Yeah.
That we can't remain married if it continues, having multiple affair partners. So yes, I believe that. And do we need to address in any greater depth the accepting of a person without accepting of the behavior, or?
Well, I want to use a different example, because sometimes we think of acceptance with these really big, like addiction,
it's not always
gambling.
a huge thing.
But I shared this at the end of the sabbatical episode that I did. And I was talking about the things I learned and changes in my life and things like that. So while I was on my sabbatical, one of the things that you realized during my time off was a resentment that you didn't realize you had toward me.
Yeah.
About how much I traveled.
Yeah.
Especially for work. And how you had begun to feel like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I interpreted it was you began to feel like I was using and abusing your ability to stay home with the kids and just kind of do whatever I wanted to do whenever I wanted to do it. And my family came second to my work and how I was prioritizing things. And so this is a perfect example too. Like, you loved and accepted me, but it was something I was doing that wasn't edifying to the family. It was a hard conversation that we had to go through. It was difficult for me to hear because I took it very much on my shoulders. Like, when you said that to me, it was like my whole world shattered for a week. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And how do I rectify this? And so that's another example of, like, I couldn't just keep doing that because I was traveling a lot without the family or without you. And so it allowed us to have a conversation of okay, well, what, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about end goal of aspirations. Like we would have never been able to, that was something you and I needed to work through in order for us to be able to have some deeper conversations about like our core needs, what the future looked like, what we wanted the future for our family to look like, which then led to changes that had to happen. But ultimately also like, okay, so if I'm going to travel, we take the family, or you go with me, or like, so we just made some changes. But I also could have listened to you say that and just said, I would have not done this. But as an example, well, I have to. Like I have to because it's what helps bring money into the family. So you just need to be okay with that. And that's how people get defensive in these situations, which leads to, and you could tell, like if you had been that vulnerable coming to me saying all of that, and then I would just been like, nope, you're wrong. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Then that continues that divide, and you can't be as vulnerable, and trust won't build as easily, and it affects everything down the road.
I had forgotten about that.
It was a pretty monumental part of
No,
my.
you handled it with humility and grace, and we've worked on a lot of compromises. So now when you're like, no, really, I have to go to this thing, and it's going to be very difficult to take the family, not impossible. I'm a lot more comfortable being like, all right, I'll stay home. I don't love it, but like we'll do it. Is there a way we can shorten the trip possibly so that you only do this, and this? And your willingness to work with me and not be like, screw you. I think that's helped a lot. And sometimes your disposition and attitude, if you simply approach an issue with a willingness to try and compromise, that'll often make the other person feel respected. So then we go into, before I get to self-acceptance, for those who are familiar with what's the technical name of the commitment?
Triangulation of love.
The triangulation of love. So if you are a listener and you're able to like Google stuff, go into Google, type in the triangulation of love, hit images, and it should be a triangle. It has intimacy at the top, commitment in the lower right, and passion in the lower left. And what I really want to talk about here more than anything is intimacy. So on a 1 to 9 scale, 9 would be the top of the triangle, 1 would be the bottom. When you measure a couple, you don't aggregate their results. Each individual person keeps their results. And it is absolutely possible, if you're following what I'm saying, if you're looking at the picture, or if you're just otherwise not looking at a picture but trying to visualize, think of a line, that intimacy is a straight up and down line. Higher is better, lower is not better. Lower is very low.
Is worse.
It's bad. It's altogether possible to have one person in a couple, in a marriage, in a relationship, even a friendship or a parental to child relationship, where one person has a very high intimacy score, which means that they feel that they can bare their soul, they can expose themselves, they can be their true self around this other person, to this other person, they can tell them anything. That person's going to have a very high intimacy score because they feel fully accepted. And then the other person is like a 2 or a 3. They cannot, or at least they don't feel that they can bare their soul. This can often relate back to, in many cases, you'll find the man, not always, it's certainly possible that this is flip-flop. The woman would be high in intimacy, the man would be low. I feel that if you were to try and aggregate a lot of these and do some like metadata analysis, you'd probably find the majority of the cases where there's a high discrepancy in intimacy between a man and a woman it's typically probably going to be the man much higher than the woman in most cases. And a lot of times this can relate back to men. We can be very opinionated about like what's good, what's bad, what brands, what sports teams, what cars are good. And to us, it does not compute that somebody else can have a different opinion. And especially early in marriages and relationships, we can then criticize the other person for having a different opinion. Something as simple as a preference for Coke or Pepsi, a preference between this sports team or that sports team. If you live down in Alabama and you have a couple where, one person roots for Auburn, the other roots for Bama, like they might need to just start their
fighting words.
Yeah, they might need to start their marital therapy, like just from the get-go. And so you're often left. You can also have a situation where early in the marriage, the first year or two, it is the case where the man is not accepting, and the woman may never recover from that. Even if he matures later on and becomes more accepting, she may not feel it, or because of all the rejection or criticism she faced in the first year or two of marriage, she still may not want to bare her soul. Years later, decade later, because she's like, nope. I remember 10 years ago when I said I like Pepsi, and I got an earful for an hour over it. And I remember I would do stuff like this to you. Maybe not over drink preferences, but just random crap. If you screwed something up just a little bit, I'd go on for like an hour. And you would often point out, like, chill. I already said I'm sorry. I can't go back in time. And I would often be like, oh, yeah, it's true. I'd be like, all right, well, I want to rant for 30 more minutes, but I guess I'll not. So it's important when you are thinking of intimacy in terms of, can I bare my soul to this other person? Can I tell them anything about me and they accept me? Make sure that's a two-way street. And if your spouse, if you suspect that they may not be bearing themselves to you, I actually think you could probably go to them gently in conversation and say, hey, you know what? Am I blocking intimacy? Are you scared to bare yourself to me? Are you scared to tell me about yourself? And whatever I've done to cause you to feel like you can't do that, I'm truly sorry. Yeah. I want you to know that I want to accept you. I want to accept all of you just the way you are.
Yeah.
And I believe that conversation will probably go a long way.
For sure. It'd be a wise thing to do.
And it helps to have self-acceptance.
Yeah, for sure. And the self-acceptance, when we can look at ourselves and instead, as women, a lot of times we'll look at ourselves and say, oh, if only this area of my body were skinnier or this area were bigger, instead of just looking at ourselves and loving and accepting our body for how it is, as an example.
For men, it's our calves.
It's your calves and biceps.
Our calves are not big enough.
Upper body strength, according to the body esteem scale. But the more likely we are to see things within ourselves that should change, that's more likely to translate into how we see other people. And I notice this a lot with our daughter. So I've had to be really mindful as she gets older of noticing how I talk about myself, because she picks up on it. And I don't want her to think, oh, maybe I should, because she's heard me talk before about like needing, like, oh, I want to be on a diet or whatever. And then she started using those words. This was probably about a year ago. And I was like, no, you don't. But it makes you have to look inward and say, how am I showing those people around me that I can love and value and cherish myself? And that also helps us love and value and cherish others. Well, as we wrap up the episode, what are your key 3 takeaways from today's episode?
I think we touched on it last and we touched on it briefly, but self-acceptance is kind of a cornerstone. acceptance is a two-way street, but you can only control how much you accept the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you want to successfully move to the later stages of the love path toward joint aspirations and things, mutual acceptance is key to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Love it. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Until next time. Until next week, stay strong.
I'll try.